Welcome back to another Interview Wednesday here on Turnbuckle Trash Talk. I am the officiant, Kent, and joining me is a very special guest, lethal graduate and the Scoundrel, Rod Grimes. First off, thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome, man. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
The pleasure's all mine, trust me.
Oh, it should be.
So I want to take it back to the very, very beginning.
Okay.
When did you first discover wrestling?
Man.
What was your first wrestling memory?
So it's probably I'm the oldest. I have a brother and sister. They're younger than me. I actually have a half sister as well. But my cousins growing up were like my older brothers. So they're a couple years older than me. So I just remember going over to their house, and they were watching the NWA. It was a scalpel match. And I think it was the Road Warriors versus the Midnight Express with Jim Cornette. And I just remember sitting in there and looking at the TV, just staring at it and being like, memorized. I'm like, what is this? Like, what am I watching? You know, so that was like my first like outside of WWF experience. But also too was like Hulk Hogan growing up. I mean, he was everywhere, you know, as a kid.
Well, so you're speaking my language, because a lot of the people I interview, they're like, oh yeah, like Eddie Guerrero. And I'm like, yes, Eddie was amazing, but I'd already been into wrestling for 10 years by the time Eddie came around. So it's really nice to be able to talk to someone who remembers the Hogan era and remembers the Rock and Roll Express era, which is coming back, coincidentally.
Absolutely. I mean, that's my favorite time, man. That's what I grew up on. That's, if you look at my character right now, I take a lot of stuff from the 80s and 90s, because just a lot of people aren't doing it, especially with the character development with how I go about with the Scoundrel.
Well, and a lot of your strengths, in my opinion, as a character is your crowd interaction and your interaction with whoever you're competing against. Like, you bring so much character to the table in an era, kind of like you were saying, where character isn't as much of the focus. It's more on the athleticism. And I find that, A, your athleticism is incredible, but it's really your character that sets it apart for me. Like, if I'm going to book two people, one of them I want to be, my first priority, I should say, would want to be someone who brings a lot of character, because that's what the fans invest in. At the end of the day, yes, the athleticism is great, but if I can't invest in a character, I couldn't care how good the match is.
I agree with you to a point, but the way I look at my character and the way I think about what I want to do in the ring is if I was 5 years old sitting in that front row, what would I remember? What stuck out to me as a kid? And one of the people I absolutely loved as a kid, was Roddy Piper. I mean, he's very vocal.
Yes.
He didn't do much. I mean, here's the thing. When you look at wrestlers, there's two ways you remember them. You remember them either for their promos or for their matches. You don't ever remember, like, in between there,
No.
So it's like, man, it's like Ric Flair, he had an awesome match. Well, I guess Ric Flair's the exception. He has awesome promos and awesome matches.
That's true.
When you look at Dusty Rhodes, like, Dusty Rhodes had great promos. Yes, he had some good matches here and there too, but his promos stand out to me more than anything. Roddy Piper, I mean, tell me one Roddy Piper great match. I mean, sure, he had good matches.
Yeah, but it was his segments.
His segments, his promos, the Piper Pit, I mean, that just stood out because that brought out his character. And so that's what I really try to do when I am in the ring, try to bring out that character. Ravishing Rick Rude was another one that I was a huge fan of growing up. The way he came in the ring, the way, he just looked at the crowd and interact with them, just taking off his robe, and everyone went nuts, It's so, as a kid, when I look at myself as, if I was 5 years old sitting in that front row, what do I want? And that's kind of how, if you see, like my gimmick, my every part of me is something that reminds me of what stood out to me as a kid. So like my boots, like I had the flames in my boots. That's like when Hogan turned heel, he had those the fire on his boots there a little bit. So that kind of always stood out to me because it made it a staple. If you looked at my jacket, I had the spikes all over it. Growing up, a lot of people were fans of Road Warriors and Legion of Doom. I, on the other hand, I was a big WWF fan first and foremost, so Demolition. I absolutely loved the Demolition. Just the way they came down the ring with that leather and their spikes. And then my mask. I have my mask that I custom made. I didn't want something that anyone can just buy at a store. So, when I go to a new show or anywhere I go, you may not remember my name, but you'll be like, man, Mom, that guy with that mask and the guy with the spikes, that's what stands out. So that's how I really try to come across my character.
No, and it absolutely works. And one of the things I really want to compliment you on is I actually saw one of your first matches. It was when I was first really looking into the Florida scene down here. I think it was like a 6 or 8 man tag match you did.
Yeah, 6-man tag, yeah.
And honestly, of all the people that came out, now I've come to know some of them better and everything since then, but yours was the one that I remembered. Because you already knew what you wanted to be. Even in that first match, even those first couple matches, you already had a really firmly established character in mind. You had a vibe you were going for, and you executed it perfectly. And so I think that's just such a huge testament to you, because we see so many kids coming out of school now being like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I want to do. And I always, as advice to people, say, don't set your first gimmick is going to be your only gimmick, because there's no way that's going to be possible. But for you, I would say the opposite. You picked what would work and have driven it so hard that it does work.
But here's the thing is, if you go back and watch that match, my gimmick and my outfit has actually evolved, you know? Like, I came out with a black leather with little spikes on it, and then I was like, you know what, added touch. I painted up the white around there to give it a more, just make it pop more. But, I mean, it's something that I thought about for a very long time. You know, I didn't have my name until I wanted to be, I'm a big horror movie fan, so I love horror movies. I can watch them all day long. So I wanted my character to be spooky. I wanted to be freaky. I just wanted something that, you know, if you saw me walking down a dark alley, I wanted you to turn your head and walk away. That's what I really was trying to go for. Like, you know, when you saw me coming, that you know, women would grab their purse and pull it into their side. You know, they would grab their kid and hold their hand. And so that was what I was really trying to go for. And I mean, I think it's gone good. Now you see a lot of other wrestlers out there that have come out with the masks, are real similar to mine now. I mean, even though mine's custom made. So I actually have something that it's going to evolve to the next step, something that no one else has had and no one else is doing. So that's going to come here in the next couple months.
Well, and it needs to, too. You need to be constantly evolving, because, yes, you're right. You're going to get a lot of people who copy what you do, especially if they see it successful. And the business evolves, tastes evolve. So people aren't necessarily going to be a fan of what you're doing forever. They might like it for a spell, and then it might die off, and you need to be the next thing to make yourself relevant. I mean, this is one of the great things about people like Chris Jericho, is that he knew he needed to change, and he always changed when he needed to.
Absolutely.
Before people were sick of it, he'd make the change necessary to make people love him again, and that's how he can have a 30-plus year career and still be relevant.
I mean, he evolved. He's the only person that could reinvent himself after after each era of wrestling. You know, you have to be able to do that. You become stagnant. You know, it's something that I am a firm believer. Even when I created my gimmick, I was like, okay, what can I do to evolve this gimmick already? So even the first 2-3 months, I already had plans for phase 2, phase 3 already laid out down the line. It's just one of those things where, as I grew as a wrestler, as I started traveling more, I started to establish that character, so that those, I had to take a step back from that when I felt was going to be ready. But I always had that, waiting. And for example, I've had a new mask made for over 6 months now. I just haven't, debuted it yet.
You haven't had the moment.
I haven't had the moment yet. I'm gonna, but when it comes, it's going to be memorable. It's going to evolve. It's going to take phase 1 into phase 2, but blend them together. And I think that's the thing where a lot of people not necessarily mess up in wrestling, but they do change their gimmick. I think it should evolve.
Right.
Where some people just go away and come back as something brand new. I get it, but then what happens when that comes stale again? So if you can take the same character and evolve it over time, I think it takes skill to do that. But I think that's the best characters, like Jericho. You're saying,
yeah,
he's the same. He's
the same guy.
Same guy in WCW.
Yeah.
Smart ass. Quick-witted. Not afraid to embarrass himself. Athletic. He's that same character now, but he evolved it. With the scarf. With the list. With the champion. And everything that he's doing. So it's just a testament of his character, testament of him. So that's one guy I really try to emulate over the years. Is just creative-wise, what can I do? I always got to be moving forward.
Well, surface fans might forget who you are, and so if you come back as something new, nobody will know. But the real hardcore fans, the ones you really want to hook into being fans of yours, won't forget who you were. Yeah. So to try and fool them into believing oh, I'm not that same person, they're just not going to be able to do that on the deepest fundamental level. They're still going to remember, oh, I remember when he was that dork getting his ass kicked all the time before. I'm now supposed to believe he's some demon from the deep beyond. Come on.
Yeah.
So was there a particular moment when you were like, I've got to do this. Like, I want to be a part of this business. I want to be a wrestler. Did that happen for you at a specific time, or were you kind of always feeling that way?
I just couldn't get enough, man. It was like a drug for me. It's just the more I got, the more I wanted. And so I was, watching a lot of WWF growing up. I would watch Saturday morning cartoons of WWF. I would watch WCW, NWA. I just couldn't get enough. And then when even when it was starting to become a little stale, when I found ECW, it blew my mind. So it was just like the further I went down that rabbit hole, the more and more I wanted. So I've always wanted to be part of go to professional wrestling school. I've always wanted to be part of the business and the industry. It's just I wish it would have happened sooner than later. And it was supposed to. A lot of people don't realize this. When I was 18 years old, I was living up in Pennsylvania. I was actually supposed to go to Chikara's wrestling school at that point in time.
You would have been a great fit for Chikara, actually.
And, it was close to my house. I was talking with Mike Quackenbush at the time, and, I blew my transmission. I had the money all set. I blew my transmission on my car. So that money went to repair my car instead. And at that time, I was playing college football in Reading, Pennsylvania. I actually did a school project. I was taking up digital media at the time. And I ended up switching my major later on. But I did a school project for my video editing class on Mike Quackenbush. So I actually went to his house. We, did a lot of stuff. So, I was always wanting to be part of the wrestling industry one way or another. So
I always find it interesting to find out how people discovered how to get into wrestling, because it used to come from this carny mindset of like, that was a secret. Finding out how to get into wrestling was kind of a secret, or like there was very unlikely odds that you'd make it. Like we'd heard about like the power plant and stuff growing up, but getting there was no clear-cut path or road. They never taught you, okay, this is how you go about becoming a wrestler. Like to become a football player, you start in Pee Wee, you go to high school, you go to college, then you go to the pros and stuff like that. But with wrestling, it was always kind of this hidden thing. And now I feel like in the age of, the internet, all you have to do is Google wrestling school and you'll find one. But what was your journey into going into training? You kind of talked about it a little bit with the Chikara thing.
But even before that, so growing up, at that point in time, Alpha from the Wild Samoans had a training school right in Pennsylvania right there. Was an hour or two from my house. My cousins were friends with the family. And I remember as a little kid, I went to Alpha's house in Pennsylvania, and so I always knew he had a wrestling school there. And then a guy named Bud Carson had what they call the Pro Wrestling World in Allentown, Pennsylvania. It was the only standalone pro wrestling store. It had VHS tapes, DVDs. He did autograph signings there. And then behind the they had the whole freaking setup there, and then the back room had a ring there, and they would do training there. So I always knew that there was a place to go to train, so I wasn't like I had to search for it. It was right in front of me. But it wasn't until I actually moved to Florida is when I actually found that. So just like a lot of people, probably in the early 2000s, I was playing college football, and then I stopped playing football. I started taking up full contact kickboxing, and then I moved down to Florida, and I was going to start training jiu-jitsu and MMA, and I wanted to go into the fighting. That's what I really wanted to do. And at that point in time, as UFC was coming really big, really mainstream, and when WCW shut down, ECW shut down, I kind of lost interest in wrestling. And because of the whole realism with fighting becoming mainstream now, they put all the different rules in. That was something that was really appealing to me. So I started going down that path there for a while and put wrestling on the back burner. Thought that point my life was actually done and over with, to be honest with you. And it wasn't until later on, fast forward another probably 10 years later, my one of my best friends sent me a message and said, "Hey man, Jay Lethal has a school in Clearwater. I know you always talked about wanting to go, be a pro wrestler in that time." And I was training jiu-jitsu at the time, and I was like, yeah, but, I don't know what I want to do. And he's like, oh, man, you should really, why not? Go do it. It's Jay Lethal. So one night I got real drunk, and at like 1:30 in the morning, I was like, got the courage up, and I just started sending emails to which I thought was Jay, but it was probably, the guy at the training school.
The
and
administrators.
The administrators here. And that was kind of opened the door there, and they invited me to come down and meet with Jay and to see the school, and then here we are now.
Well, what was that training process like for you? I always ask people, what was the easiest thing that came to you the quickest in training, and what was the hardest? And as an example for me, bumping was the hardest. because I was overcoming my natural instinct to protect myself and just take it.
Yeah.
What came easiest and hardest, and what was it like training under Jay Lethal?
So I would say wrestling's a lot like jiu-jitsu in a way, where a lot of guys that are like muscle-bound guys or guys that meatheads, you know, you always want to try to overpower things and do things. So one thing I had a hard time doing is not trying to be so, you know, try to overpower things, you know, get the flow and going through things. I had a really hard time running the ropes to start off with, you know, getting the footwork down there. Bumping, I didn't have a problem bumping. I played college football. I was used to, you know, getting punched or hit and stuff like that, so that didn't scare me at all. But just, you know, pulling back the curtain to wrestling too, that was another thing that was just fascinating to me, but also scary at the time, because, you know, if you go to a magic show, the whole magic in front of it, you know, being out there, you know, watching like, oh, how did he do it? Now knowing how it's done, you know, that was actually kind of scary for me, because I was like, am I going to ruin my experience of wrestling? And, you know, and to the point it kind of has in a way, you know, when I watch it, but at the same point in time is I love it so much that, you know, I still can enjoy it.
Well, I remember a particular lesson at Jay's school where he said, if you come to this class, I am going to ruin wrestling for you. And I'm not going to say what it is, obviously, because, you know, A, a lot of people could probably figure it out on their own, and B, why ruin it? But hearing that, I was like, uh-oh, is this actually going to ruin it? And then I heard it, and I was like, oh, well, I kind of can see how I knew that already, but you just really solidified it. And you're right. Like, it's been this magical, important part of your whole life, and you're saying, I want to go deeper, but is going deeper going to make all those good memories I have evaporate or tarnish them in some fashion? So how did you overcome that and keep your love of wrestling? Because I could see it burning out a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, no matter, put it this way, growing up, no matter how bad of a day you had, no matter what I was doing, you know, your dog died, like you get in trouble at school, like it didn't matter what it was. Once wrestling was on TV, everything around me just stopped. You know, I was taken away. I mean, I got lost in that moment for those 2 or 3 hours. So that was always really special for me. And one thing that wanted me to keep going and keep doing what I'm doing is that to give someone else that moment, you know, knowing that I can, you know, no matter how crappy your day you're having, how bad your life is, you know, knowing that you go into a wrestling show and get your mind off it and being involved, interacting with the fans. So that's why I go back to why I interact so much with the fans, because I know like what got under my skin. I knew, you know, me interacting with those fans, that made me want to come back and be part of the show, because that's why I came there. It was to sustain belief. You know, for those 2 hours, or, you know, whatever it was the show was, to sustain belief. And so that's why I really try to do myself in my matches with people but that's kind of what keeps me going, is just that knowing that I can do that now and help pass that on to someone else.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, you can get burned out, you know, and there's times I'm like, this sucks.
No, it's really hard to pace yourself, especially since, you know, you want to get as much exposure as possible. You want to actually try to make some money doing this, even though the pay is what it is. So I can totally see, like, yeah, you want to have drive and you want to have dedication, but you also have to say, I need to take a break when you need to take a break. It's okay to take, you know, 2 weeks off. You won't lose all your momentum. Now, if you take 2 months off, you might. Yeah. But as long as you know this is what you want to do and you can keep that fire built, no matter what, when you come back, you'll have that same drive and motivation, even maybe more so. That'll get you even further. So what do you remember about your first match? I've heard horror stories. I've heard surprisingly good stories about people's first matches. What do you remember about yours? Opponents?
You know, I mean, I remember everyone who was in the match. You know, I remember just being nervous, but not being nervous, because it's one of those things where it's like, hey, if I didn't know it now, I'm not going to know it at all. So it's one of those things where people try to cram before the test, and you're like,
you were as ready as you were going to be.
You know, but all I remember is once the music hit and I walked out of that curtain, I felt alive. I felt like I was at home, like where I was supposed to be. You know, so that was a great feeling. I do remember my idiot friend showing up and, you know, giving me the finger and
I remember
booing
that too,
me
actually.
and having signs that were very inappropriate. Which
for a family-friendly show, yes.
So thank God I was wearing a mask, because, you know, I would have kind of maybe broke character my first time out there. But, I mean, I do remember that, just getting in the ring and I just remember once we got in the ring where, you know, once the final bell rang, I was like, that went by so quick. And, you know, even though we were only out there for like, you know, we were out there 8 or 10 minutes or however long it was, it felt like we were out there for 30 seconds. It just flew by. Like, it just felt we were naturally there, and I just remember having the biggest smile on my face, leaving there, and I was like, I just wanted more.
What would you say has been your best match so far, and who was it against? Or your favorite? It doesn't even have to be your best.
So I have a couple that really stand out to me. Of course, it's going to be wrestling Jay Lethal.
Wrestling about that one too.
You wrestle my trainer, someone I really looked up to, watched on TV, so that was awesome. Very surreal moment, knowing that, especially where, I got the win in the match, and we were actually, it was supposed to be a surprise. We were supposed to, a lot of people don't know this, we were actually supposed to be wrestle at the show before that. And so I knew a lot of stuff that was going to be happening, so I just had to keep my mouth shut for weeks.
Which is so hard to do.
Especially with, just starting out in wrestling and knowing that I'm going to be having this match, and I couldn't tell anybody, and and
you want to promote it too. You want to
yeah. like,
please come see this. This is the show you don't want to miss.
But it actually ended up working out for the best. Jay hurt his back, and then we couldn't do our match of that show, and then we were able to promote it. We actually had a really big crowd and good turnout for the night. So that was one that really stands out to me. Another one is I wrestled Hunter Law in Georgia, and we did a very old school Memphis style match where powder, like all kind of gimmicks and all these different things, and it just falsies after pin attempts after pin attempts, and the crowd just was eating out of the palm of their hands. It was great. That was something that always really stands out to me. Me and Hunter always had really good chemistry in the ring, so I really enjoyed wrestling him. And then the other one would be wrestling Snoop in a fans bring the weapons match
at the video game show.
Yeah, at the video game show.
I got to ref that match,
yeah.
which was phenomenal, and I was actually going to bring that up as probably one of my favorite memories of you, was being able to do that match, because you guys went all in, no question, but you'd also orchestrated it to the point that the fans could be invested and involved. It stole the show hands down, no question, and I felt like it brought so much attention and love to Tampa Bay Pro Wrestling at the time, when it could, when honestly I thought like it really needed it. You injected new life into the show. And it was just an amazing experience.
So me and Snoop, we were feuding there for a couple months, and one thing that like I was talking to you before we even started doing this was, in wrestling you really need to think outside the box. What can we do to bring some new fans into it? And a lot of people don't know I am a huge retro gamer. I have 14 different systems at my house hooked up. I have over 1,000 games. So everything from Nintendo to Sega, the Super Nintendo, you name it, 64, Atari, PlayStation, I love it. So
would you say games is your other love, wrestling and video games?
Yeah, wrestling, video games, and then I have a side business I do, which I'm very passionate about. So yeah, those are the three things that I really, really enjoy. But I had the opportunity. There's a group called Tampa Bay Trade Day at the time, and it's a Tampa Bay video game group here, and they were doing events. And I started going to their events because I was just a big fan, and I reached out to them, say, hey, would you guys like to set up and do a convention at one of our events? And me and Snoop weren't even supposed to do the Fans Bring the Weapons match at that show. It just happened how things just fell, and we had a huge turnout for it. It was great, man. We made some new fans that night.
We did.
For the company.
Definitely.
So they helped promote it. They did some giveaways, and it was scary though. I will tell you, because doing a Fans Bring the Weapons match, when I'm sitting in the back and people are coming up to me, hey, someone has a bat covered in thumbtacks. Someone brought mouse traps. Yeah, someone brought light tubes, and just people just bringing the most random things. Someone brought a giant Lego sledgehammer.
Yes,
which was awesome. You know what I mean? So the fact that we got here's the thing again, how can we bring the fans involved in wrestling? And that's something that I feel like AEW is doing a really good.
They're doing a very good job
doing that now.
Immersion,
yeah. But is on the independent level, what can we do to help bring in new fans or have bigger shows? I'm a firm believer that you should have the old WWF philosophy where you had 4 major shows a year. SummerSlam, Survivor Series, WrestleMania, Royal Rumble, and then you have your shows in between there. But you always build a big show. So what I wanted to do, and I was talking to Tampa Bay Pro at the time, I was like, let's focus on these quarterly events, make these big shows to try to bring some new fans in, and that's something we were doing the video game convention.
Yeah.
And, it sucks that the bar shut down, so we lost the venue because we had some other things in the works that I was helping out with. So,
What's the goal? What's your end game kind of to all of this? I mean, a lot of people say, which I think is the cliche answer, if I want to be in the WWE. I think everybody wants to be in the WWE if the option was available. But what is your end goal? Do you just want to do this as long as you can and enjoy it? Or do you say, like, I want to be in a New Japan or a WWE or an AEW? Like, where do you want to be? Where do you want to end up?
So interesting you say that, is because I'm one of the people that really, I wouldn't want to be in the WWE, to be honest with you. I mean, yeah, would I take the opportunity if it ever came? Absolutely. But at the same point in time is, you know, when you hear the horror stories of being on the road for 300 days a year, you know, being away from your family, that's not very appealing to me. You know, I have other goals outside of wrestling as well. And, you know, I own a house, I have a family, so it hinders me to the point where, you know, if I would do something like that, that would change up everything.
Yeah.
Where, you know, when you have companies like Ring of Honor, you have companies like AEW, where they have more of a limited
NWA.
Yeah, NWA. So those are more appealing to me. Even, you know, like 2 years ago, I did a New Japan camp out at the LA dojo out there, and even like the New Japan wrestlers, when they go on a 2-week tour, with actually, like, they go over there for 1 week before, and then they do like a 2-week tour, and then they're home a week. So I mean, even that's a little bit more appealing than it would say, you know. But my biggest thing is I love to travel, so it incorporates wrestling and traveling, adds a big element for me, and now it helps me really expand on some new ideas I'm working on now, and actually ties in where, like, I run an online business as well, so now I'm trying to find a way to incorporate all three into one, where they can just piggyback and build off each one.
Yeah.
So that's my goal, is to really build that up. I mean, I'll go as far as wrestling will take me, but at the same point in time is, you know, I know there's limitations, and I know that I don't have the flexibility to go, you know, to leave on
you know yourself and what you want to do well enough. You still want to succeed as a businessman. You still want to succeed as a family man. Like, you still have your priorities straight well enough that you can say, yeah, I would love to work in the WWE. I don't have the lifestyle that affords the WWE. And that is huge, because we've heard so many, again, horror stories of broken families, parents that were never around, like, and the ripple effect that has for the rest of their lives. I mean, there's a great documentary about Jake the Snake Roberts and how his whole life fell apart because of wrestling, which he didn't even really want to do.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. But it's so great to hear that, you know, you have your head on your shoulders, you know what you want to do. And I think you're deserved some credit, too, because you talked about liking to travel. And I feel like you kind of were a trailblazer for this new era of, like, independent worker by going out into Georgia. I feel like you were kind of one of the first guys to go out into Georgia and to find SWA, right?
Yeah.
And to break into that territory, and it was cool to see so many other people kind of following in your path. What inspired you to do that, and what was that experience like for you?
So I'm a firm believer that you should pay it forward, you know, and so Hunter Law and Brandon were going up there and doing shows in the SWA, and they asked me if I want to tag along and go. So any opportunity, I would love. One of my goals was to work out of state. So I got up there and for a show, and I guess some people didn't show up for it. And one thing led to another. I wasn't booked in the show. I was just going up there. One thing led to another, and next thing I know, I was the main event of the show, which is extremely weird because no one up there knew me or who I was. And
yeah, it seemed like overnight you were top heel in the company and then champion, like before you knew it.
Yeah, so that was cool, but then it opened up other doors. Though I got in Alabama then, and I got to travel a little bit more up there, and other promotions up in Georgia started booking me. So yeah, it was cool. And then what I did was, you know, because they brought me up there with them, and you know they went through, you know, torn knees and ankles and got really hurt. And then when I have some opportunity to bring some new students with me, I started to pay it forward. So I've gotten probably 10, you know, over a dozen new students up there, and at least worked up in Georgia and out of state, which is great.
So I'm going to ask you the final 4 questions I ask at the end of every interview, and we can kind of lightning through them because I know we got a show to do here shortly. Number 1, what's your kind of overall impression of the landscape of wrestling right now? A lot of people say, oh, it's a boom. I'm not that optimistic yet, but I could see it being the spark that ignites a boom. But you've got Wednesday Night Wars happening. You've got NWA doing incredible things. You've also got some controversy going on in Ring of Honor and other companies. What's kind of your overall view of the landscape of wrestling right now?
So depending on how you look at it, from what side you look at it. So it is a boom right now for all the guys that are signed to major companies. It's a boom for them. They depleted the independent scene. So I feel like, over the years, you would have your 2 or 3 guys that get signed, moved up, and then you would have the next batch of guys that would slowly evolve over time. I feel like everything got pillaged and depleted, in the past year or two. So I think as an independent wrestler, I think the opportunities there are wide open. I think as an independent wrestler, it's a booming opportunity, meaning that, yes, you're still going to go through all the BS and travel and do the stuff, but there's more opportunity now to get your name out there, because who's the next level of independent wrestlers? I mean, everyone signed them independent. I mean, you had Impact, you had MLW, you had Ring of Honor. I mean, everyone was fighting for the same people. Now the next group of guys had to start evolving and break out.
Yeah, and that I can agree with you there, because the opportunities are there.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that this is a good financial boom for wrestling, because still a lot of people not making money in this business, but I think a lot of people are trying their hand at running a wrestling show, which opens a whole new roster of spots to the independents. And you're right, there is kind of a weird vacuum now, because all the big companies signed up the majority of the independents, and now, this is the perfect time to kind of make your name. I think another thing I like about this, what's going on right now, is there's something for everybody. There's no excuse to hate wrestling as a whole if you have a specific niche of wrestling you like, because if you're into the old school style, you got NWA. If you're into the more like new school style, you got AEW. If you're the Machine, WWE. Like, I really do think if you've ever liked wrestling, or if you like wrestling at all, you can find something for yourself. My next question would be, what illusions or misconceptions did you have about the business that were kind of shattered once you got into it?
Man, it's just, like I said, you pulling the curtain back, first and foremost, the magic disappeared there for a while. It's the illusion of not giving away too much of what we do on our side of things, but that was a big one for me. That took away a lot of stuff, because now when I watch wrestling on TV, or if I watch a show, I can foreshadow, or I can tell the person next to me, say, hey, watch this. Or so I know what's going to come. I know where they are in the progression of things.
It's a lot harder to live in the moment of wrestling once
Correct.
you know the formula. And
no, don't get me wrong. There's still things that that will pop me, like when Bill Goldberg beat Kevin Owens for the title, or Kevin Owens showed up in NXT. So some things that still pique my interest, because I didn't see it coming. And that's the best thing about wrestling is that surprise. So that was probably the biggest thing for me, is that surprise element was taken away.
What piece of advice would you give to somebody who was looking to get into the wrestling business?
So I will give you the same piece of advice that was given to me, and it's the best advice ever. If you see a hot girl at an independent wrestling show, do not hit on her, because that's a worker's wife or a worker's girlfriend. Because hot girls don't go to independent wrestling shows by themselves.
That's pretty accurate, I would say.
Unfortunately, yeah.
What one thing would you change about the wrestling business?
Man, everyone just backstab and work together. I mean, we're all in there for the same thing. Everyone has something to offer. I mean, you may not be the best worker, but you do something better than I do. I may be the best talker, but you do something better than I do. Like, we can learn from each other. Everyone has something to offer, and I think that we would be more successful and get rid of that old school mentality of it's a dog-eat-dog world. Yes, I grant it, we're all fighting for the same spots, but at the same point in time, we can elevate each other to get to those spots.
Now I want to take it into a segment that Tony Stabile has named Take It Home, where you get a chance to plug anything you want to plug, your social media, promotions that you're particularly fond of, or people can see you at, anything you want. Here's your platform.
All right, so you can find me on Facebook, Raw Grimes Wrestling. Same thing on Instagram, Rob Grimes Wrestling. I am on Twitter as Heel Raw Grimes. I think it's Heel Raw Grimes.
I'll find it.
Yeah, find me. Put it down there. But I will tell you, I am actually going to be coming out with a new YouTube show. And so one thing that you mentioned earlier, when you talked about where, there's no money in wrestling, my question to you is, why is that?
Because people aren't getting it the right way, to be completely honest. I think there is money in wrestling. I think that people just don't know what they're doing and how to get it.
But also, too, with everyone traveling, you need to find ways to make it beneficial for yourself. So a lot of people don't realize that not only do I do a lot of wrestling, but I'm also a picker as well. So I'm actually coming out with a new YouTube show. It's similar to like American Pickers meets Pawn Stars, where when I'm on the road traveling, I actually go around, I do yard sales, flea markets, thrift stores. I pick up a lot of merchandise and I flip it on eBay. So I've been doing that now. I've been selling eBay for like 20 plus years. I just reopened up my store in October, which is doing really, really well this past month. So that's something I'm going to be doing a weekly series, which is going to be incorporating wrestling and picking on the way. It's going to be called Picking and Punching.
That's genius. I'm excited for that. Well, yeah, you guys got to check that out. Rod, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you guys for checking out another Interview Wednesday here on Turnbuckle Trash Talk.